Thank you for staying with us. We get into our big stories, but let me just let you know, on the last leg of the show, we'd love to hear from you. We're getting reports of a lot happening when it comes to the rains and some places being flooded. At the tail end of the show, get ready. We'd love to hear from you on social media and also via the phone line to know what the state of your neighborhood is by way of the flooding. We'll also bring you the latest on the constituency developments as the MPP has its elections. But in our big stories, there are damning revelations in the 2021 U.S. State Department report as the neutrality of Ghana's judiciary has been called to question. Reports suggest that judges took bribes to lose the records of cases. Also, government officials are said to have been engaging in corrupt practices with impunity, with government sluggishly implementing punitive measures. This morning, we have a lot to digest as we report, as the report helps us discuss the implications of all of this on our country. And joining us for a conversation, we have on the phone line Professor Kwadwo Appiagyei, Professor of Law, University of Ghana Law School. We also have Dr. Osei Kwapong, Democracy and Development Fellow with the CDD. Dr. Kwapong joins us via Zoom. In fact, both gentlemen connect with us via Zoom. Professor Etia, Dr. Kwapong, a very good morning to you. Thank you for joining us for this discussion.
Good morning to you as well.
So let's start with, this is the country report on human rights practices for 2021. It's from the United States Department of State, the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. It's a pretty lengthy document which we have had to go through line by line just to digest the issues. But having read this document and looking at what it reflects when it comes to how we deal, for example, with those in incarceration or those in custody, when it comes to the media, when it comes to the judiciary, when it comes to corruption, our politicians and all of that, what is your overarching or summary reflection on this report? I'll start with you, Dr. Kwapong.
Yes, good morning. So I think I said on this show maybe like a week or 2 weeks ago,
right,
that some of these reports just points to the fact that democracy is always a work in progress, right? That it's not something that because we successfully made the transition in 1992, that the work is done. That this is something that we must continuously work on it, refine it, fine tune it, the issues and challenges that would crop up as different kinds of issues are captured in various types of reports. I think some of these things are, if you look at the report, some of the examples or cases that are used to illustrate some of the key points in it are things that media has reported before, are things that NGOs have highlighted, are things that are think tanks, civil society organizations, other commentators on public matters have highlighted. So I think it's just, again, one of those things that gives us, something to think about and reflect on in terms of the work that we must continuously do to strengthen and safeguard our democracy.
It's interesting that you bring that up because, I mean, it even cites, for example, Mohamed Kaka Macho and that incident as well. So a very fair reflection. Some of what we have covered in this country reflected in this research piece. And I agree with you again because in that other report that we've seen in recent times, ranking democracies, and where the US even, had quite a hard time on that league log, you would see that it is not rosy in any context, that every democracy, even the advanced ones, still have work to do, though some are doing better than others. But let me come to Professor Etia for a same, on the same issue, for your bite. What would be your summary of this human rights report? Fair reflection of where we are as a country?
Yes, I think so. I think it's a fair reflection of where we are as a country. And it also reflects what, as my friend has just said, a validation of what has been reported in the media and the work that NGOs and other non-governmental bodies have done in terms of bringing out the issues to the fore and letting people know about what is going on in the country.
Right.
However, with regard to the point about it being a reflection of our democracy, I think that we need to look at it more carefully in the context of not interpreting that to mean that this is how best we can go,
Right.
because we can do better than where we are. And so it's a call for sober reflection, admission of what has not gone well, and to say that we will certainly improve in the next report.
Let's get into some substantive issues. And as you're aware, we'll be talking about what it says about our justicial system and corruption within the judiciary. We'll talk about corruption within the political enclave, if you like, politicians and more. But just to quote, and I think it's essential that we quote certain portions of the report because of what it says. If I paraphrase, it may not be as reflective enough. So when you look at the executive summary, part of it says, it talks about our being a constitutional democracy with a strong presidency. And then it talks about domestic and international observers assessing the 2020 elections and referencing them to be transparent, inclusive, and credible. On the back of that, the Daily Guide this morning cites the report as saying that our elections in 2020 were credible. It talks about the Ghana Police Service and all of that. And then, in that same context, significant human rights issues included credible reports of, and I want us to start from there, arbitrary or unlawful killings by government or its agents, cases of cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment by the government or on behalf of the government, harsh and life-threatening prison conditions, arbitrary arrest or detention, serious restrictions on free expression and media, including violence and threats of violence against journalists. I mean, it goes on and on and on. But specifically starting from there, it cites the issue to do with Kakamacho. It cites the issue to do with the 8 that were killed in election 2020. And it cites instances even tied to what Oliver Mausi Bakavomawo has been talking about in recent times. The conditions when people are in custody. Not to mention even the feeding that it also talks about. Professor Etua, on that level, are we making any progress, even per this report and maybe outside of the report? You are in the thick of things in that arena. From what you see, are we making any progress?
Definitely, we're making some progress, but I don't think it goes far enough. And like I said earlier, the report being a reflection of the reality of our democracy doesn't mean that we should accept that we are doing well. There is still a lot that we need to do. And especially when we are talking about the area of civil and political rights. In a number of cases, the enjoyment of these rights do not actually impose financial burden or some strict burden on the government to do. Right. It is rather a negative right or negative rights whose enjoyment depends on the government not doing something. And so, considering that we have a president who has a track record of promoting human rights and so on, I think that we could have done better in that area. However, what I don't see in the report is the efforts that are being made by the current IGP to sanitize the police service. Probably he came in a bit late, and so that was not captured. But there is some work being done by the police in that regard. However, still, with regard to in the realm of the police service, they have a lot to do because they seem to take one step forward or 2 steps forward and then 1 step backwards. And so while there is some progress being recorded in some areas, in other departments, the record is still negative. And what is not being captured, especially with the work of the police, is what they do in the rural communities, which is so rampant. I've recently traveled to places where policemen are collecting 1 cedi bribes and 2 cedi bribes. And so we need to look at all of these. Policemen still collecting, doing debt collection and brutalizing people. So I think what we need to do is to come to the conclusion that all is not rosy. There is room for improvement, and we need to critically consider the situation of the prisons. It is not a place that you want to be. The police cells, it is not a place that you want to be. And the reference to the judiciary and the work they do, which has also been criticized, it's a reflection of what has been reported or what has been said about the judiciary. And so in all these departments, there's a need to improve the system. And it comes down to the accountability structures we have in place. They are weak and they are not being enforced. And so that is why we have these problems. We need to have the internal accountability systems as well as the external ones. And the external ones are being mainly driven by the non-governmental organizations or civil society. And that kind of respect that we should give to the work of civil society organizations is not being recognized by the government. It has to take U.S. State Department reports to reflect what they have already reported before we are taking them seriously.
Right.
And so when we are able to give them that power, you'll be able to do more. And that will put pressure on the external accountability systems within the constitutional structure and other legal structures to work better.
Okay. Just hold for me, Prof. Let me pick the thoughts of Dr. Kwapong as well. You heard Prof talk about the police administration, Dr. Dampari coming in, and yes, we see them doing amazing things. But per the report, and especially as you have particular interest in this area, when it comes to punishment, it says, while the Constitution and law prohibit such practices, there were credible reports police beat and otherwise abused detained suspects and other citizens. Victims were often reluctant to file formal complaints. Police generally denied allegations or claimed the level of force used was justified. And we've heard that thread so many times. It goes on also to talk about prison and detention center conditions, and talking about the fact that a lot of them are life-threatening, the conditions there, due to overcrowding, inadequate sanitary conditions, lack of medical care, physical abuse, and food shortages. Putting these two together, what is the picture that it paints for you, and what are the remedial measures you would want to see moving forward?
Yeah. So as Prof rightly said, one of the key things is the accountability structures in place to address some of these issues that you've pointed out that the report had highlighted. I think very often we do read media stories or accounts given by persons who have had the opportunity to interact with the security services like the police, come out and talk about some of these experiences, NGOs that have had access to prisons to go and see some conditions, some of the work they do, come out and talk about some of the things that they observe that are quite challenging in terms within the context of human rights. And so it becomes a question of, and then I think one of the things that the report talked about is there's even that lack of something like an ombudsman, a central point where all of these issues can be channeled through. So it's decentralized in terms of different police units at different levels, have to deal with it on an individual case-by-case basis. But I think with more and more of these reports highlighting some of these issues, the key thing is what Prof said, which is you need the accountability structures that allows the complaints that are filed to be examined more carefully, and if there are punitive measures that have to be instituted against those who violate these rules or procedures or these laws that govern how we treat people in custody, those must be more strictly enforced, that there has to be some recourse to some of these grievances being reconciled if we are to improve some of these harsh conditions that are being highlighted. And as Prof mentioned, Dr. Dampare is on now. Perhaps some of the efforts were not captured and maybe captured in the next report. But the accountability structures that he mentions is critically important to ensuring that we can mediate some of these unfortunate conditions and circumstances.
It points to our law and what it says about arresting people and the processes involved for bail, citing the 48-hour rule. And it also points to the fact that a lot of the time officials detain some prisoners for indefinite periods by renewing warrants or simply allowing the warrants to lapse, which we hear from time to time, while investigations take place. And in recent times, it has come to the fore again, even considering, and I want to use topical, and current contextual matters like Oliver Barker-Vormawor's issue and the bail situation in there. And he's not the only person. It cites this as well as one of the many infractions as far as our laws are concerned. And you remember that initially I mentioned how the report talks about how people, whether through the arms of government or institutions of government, are victimized. What is your reflection on that? I mean, it's straightforward. We have a rule when it comes to this. But oftentimes you would see that it is pretty palpable, obvious, that certain things, mechanisms are being used to punish people.
Right. And there are rules of procedures. There are rules that guarantee certain rights, even for accused persons, how you treat detainees and all of that. Rules by themselves are not self-enforcing. And so you actually do need those who have to play by those rules to be conscientious enough that they are sensitive to those rules, and regardless of how they feel about an accused person over a certain issue, that they are still willing to grant them the use of those rules so that it protects them whilst in custody, whilst being dealt with, with regards to whatever infraction that the law enforcement agencies are saying that they may have committed or allegedly committed. Sometimes I also wonder if it requires a certain amount also of a cultural change and a cultural renewal, right? That perhaps the law enforcement agencies have had a particular cultural disposition over the years in terms of how they treat people who have allegedly broken the law, and so there's a certain mindset that comes with how you deal with these people, and perhaps a cultural shift is also needed that allows them to change their attitude and change their mindset. Because I think sometimes some of those things are also critical in terms of how you end up respecting the rules of procedure, the rules of the game, and how you treat, for example, suspects in your custody.
Let me bring in Professor Itua on that self-same matter. And it is crucial, isn't it? The fact that within 48 hours we must process people, grant them bail and all of that. It has not exactly happened. And this report cites that as well, that it is rife. What do you feel? Do you feel this is a fair assessment? And what more can we do to better our response to that? Prof, if you could unmute for me, I'd be very grateful.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
That's fine.
I think it's a fair reflection of the reality on the ground, and it reflects an endemic culture that is in the police service, and in some ways in connivance with some court officials. And so I think that we need to make sure that it is really something we pay serious attention to. I remember the Martin Kpebu case that went all the way to the Supreme Court.
Right.
And the court ruled that even on weekends, judges should sit to deal with this matter. But that has not been carried out, and the police still do the weekend arrest and keep you in there over the weekend, breaching the rule. And we should also recall the attempt by Bakavomawa to go to the Supreme Court to have this issue addressed.
Right.
And I think it's important to look at that particular attempt by Bakavomawa, because he didn't want to look at just getting a bail for himself, but to address, adopt a holistic approach to address the matter. But in any case, the Martin Kpebu case deals with that. So it's a question of implementation. It's a question of implementation, and it is critical that we address that matter. It will help deal with the impunity that the police applies in a lot of places to abuse people's rights.
I'm listening to you, Prof. I'm listening to you, Prof, and you're saying it is crucial that we address that matter and to stem the tide of the impunity of the police in these actions. But we have a Supreme Court judgment on the matter, yet we have had recent occasion to go back to this. So how then do we, so to speak, force the implementation? Because it appears on paper, we know what should be done, but in reality, we also know what happens.
Yes, it involves the courts, the police, and the prison service. The prison service generally doesn't seem to have that problem. As for the prison service, the person is in custody or is on remand. So if the time is up, the person is called to come back to court. But it is more with the police, because in most cases, the bail situation, the person is in the cells and has to appear before the court. So it is about collaboration between the police and the courts. The Chief Justice should make sure that courts are ready to sit over the weekends, and the police should make sure that they're able to know these courts and allow for suspects to be taken to these courts. And we also have the case tracking system, which I had the opportunity to lead that.
We appear to have lost Prof again, but he was talking about the case tracking system, of which some people are aware. Okay, Prof, I can hear you back. Do go on. We appear to have lost Professor Chia again, but a crucial point he was making there about the case tracking system, which some institutions in collaboration with UN organizations are trying to bring on board to ensure that cases are tracked, that they are fast-tracked, if you like, and that the system cannot sit on a case and pretend something is happening when nothing actually is happening. But maybe Dr. Kwapong, you can take off from where he left. He was talking about how we could remedy the situation in this regard. Doc, just hold on. Prof, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay,
yes,
do go ahead with the point you were making.
Thank you. So I was talking about the case tracking system, which is a computer-based system that allows for the police to record a case immediately it is reported, so that it will go into the system and then it will connect to the other actors in the criminal justice system. So a case is reported, it goes to legal aid if the person will need legal assistance. Then it will go to Attorney General's department, and it goes through that cycle. It connects to the prison service as well. And so the system needs to be used by the police. So if that system is there, the alert, it will send an alert the moment the 24 or 48-hour time limit is reached, so that
it appears we have a bit of a challenge. We may try, maybe just to have the audio feed.
The other actors who are in the system will know that at the police station. And
okay. I think the weather also may be affecting. We know how things get with our networks when the weather is the way it's looking this morning. Dr. Kwapong, what is your take on what Professor Chia was sharing in that particular regard.
You're right. I mean, I agree with him. The implementation is critical, right? That having this tracking system, ensuring that all of the key stakeholders and actors involved in ensuring that this process, the rules are obeyed, followed, are able to speak to each other and connect. Because like you said, and like you mentioned, we know what the law says, we know what the rule says, but what it says and the reality are, at variance with each other. And the question then becomes, what are some of the tools and mechanisms that can be used to ensure that these rules of procedure and these laws are followed? And hopefully something like the tracking system that he was describing will be able to enhance the implementation of this.
Okay. Prof, if you could just wrap on that point that you were making. I deem you're back now. Hello, Prof?
Yes.
Okay. So do go ahead with the point you were making there.
I can hear you now. Yes. Sorry about that.
Right. Do go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so I was talking about a case tracking system that if it is allowed to work, it will help deal with some of the challenges that we're talking about. Because the moment the time is set for somebody to go to court for bail or whether there's adjournment in the case, the alert will be triggered by SMS or by some other means, by email and so on. And the other actors who are supposed to also play their part in the criminal justice system will know that we have a case in court. This person has to leave the prisons to go to court, or a judge has to apply rule on a bail and so on, so that it will make the system work. And the civil society actors that are also supposed to be part of it, so that they can also understand what is going on and give their comments or ask questions to ensure that if the actors in the criminal justice system knows that people are watching, it will make them do their work better.
Right. Staying with the services, those who are clothed with the power of the state. It goes on to talk about the approach of people in politics and also people in the police service and how they have reacted to the media. And I feel this is important because we hold people accountable for actions or inactions. Now, in this instance, it cites quite a number of incidents. David Tamaklo, for an online story that had not been even published, the report describes it as a preemptive move and what has also been described as a clear abuse of power. Then there is the SWAT team swooping on Caleb Kuda, Zoe Abubeidu, and all the matters arising from there. They also cite the Kennedy Ohene Ejapong issue when it comes to my own colleague, Erastus Asaridonko, and the fact that he called for him to be beaten and whipped. And then it also talks about the Angel FM suspended morning show host at a point, God's Brain Smart, and what happened to him. Now, looking at all of these, when you look at how the report encapsulates them and you look at our media space, what do you feel ought to be done to make the system better, to forestall some of these incidents? Because as they are put out there, it is a very poor reflection on our country of how we deal with the media. Prof, I'll start with you before I go to Dr. Kwapo.
Yes, certainly it's a very poor reflection of our society. And sometimes you get a bit embarrassed when you interact with people who comment on some of these matters and say that, well, we thought you are the beacon of democracy in Africa. And so it reflects poorly on us. And what makes it even more frustrating is the fact that the government seems to have a proclivity to sort of justify or defend or sanitize any news about human rights violations or any weaknesses or gaps in how it performs its work. But that is not supposed to be the case. If the government is doing well, there's that constructive criticism that we offer. And if it is not doing well too, the same criticism should come so that they will be able to sit back, reflect, and do better. Otherwise, what happens is that in the discourse of human rights or in the human rights context, the government will be seen to be responsible for these abuses, even though directly it's not coming from the government, because the government, first of all, has a duty to respect the rights of the people by not doing anything that will violate the enjoyment of those rights. It also has the duty to protect. And the duty to protect is saying that it is not all human rights violations that may come on the radar of the government to deal with. Certainly, there will be situations where some violations would occur. But if they do occur, the reaction of the government it makes all the difference. If the government reacts positively and proactively and deal with the matter, it will not be, the government will not be held responsible for that. But where it tries to justify,
I mean, that even works on the perception of people of what government is doing, right?
Exactly, yes. And perception really matters. Even though it's not a reality, it is very close to the reality. And that is what people use to judge the government. And so it is important that they respond to some of these concerns, because at the end of the day, it is even going to reflect on not just the democratic space, but also the economic space as well.
Right.
Because we're talking about investors who want to ensure that there is justice in the system and so on. And so if these things happen, it reflects poorly on us, so that economically, politically, socially, in every field, we should be able to draw the linkages and the dots so that one will connect to the other.
Do hold for me, Prof. And it's an important point that you've made. But Dr. Kwapong, your thoughts on that self-same matter when it comes to the media. What this reports is what we know, what we already know. But the way forward is the question, especially as if the media is muzzled, as the report seems to suggest, it means that, I mean, a lot of what we even have to put out, we may not be able to put out there, whether out of fear or out of victimization.
Right. And it comes, it comes back to also the balance question, right? Because the media plays a very critical role in our democratic space, right? Beyond just reporting the news, ensuring transparency, accountability, shining light on spaces in terms of government use of power, the resources entrusted in their care. So you need to offer the media all of the protections that it needs to be able to carry out that function very well. Of course, nobody is saying that in the enjoyment of media rights that media persons should, quote unquote, be reckless in the way they discharge their duty. But overall, to be able to do that, we need to make sure that they have all of the protections and the guarantees of that freedom that is needed to be able to do the work that is needed. And I think sometimes when I reflect, I also land on the point that there needs to be that cultural shift in terms of how we think about power, the use of power, vis-a-vis some of these entities also, right, that have to check on those who use and exercise that power, right? That if I think of the media as, quote unquote, who are you to try and check on me, I would have a very different disposition, if I'm someone who wields power and authority, than if I think of the media and the work they do as ensuring that the power entrusted in my care is not misused, and abused. And again, for me, that critical role of the media must always be safeguarded and guaranteed. Afrobarometer has a question in which it pitches government rights to be able to regulate the media against the media's rights and freedoms to be able to report the news and cover stories without any hesitations. And over 8 rounds of the survey, Ghanaians converge on on the side of media rights as opposed to the government's ability to be able to regulate the media space in terms of censorship or putting roadblocks.
Let's segue into another very topical matter that this report talks about, and it has to do with the problem of corruption. Sometimes when I have to talk about corruption, it's almost as though my mouth were or my lips were too heavy, because it's an age-old problem that we've spoken about time and again. And infamously, we heard that statement, or famously, by former President John Kufuor, that corruption has been here since the days of Adam. Interestingly, in the Fourth Republic, we've had a lot of administrations, NDC, MPP, say they're going to fight it. It has amounted to nothing. So to be fair, it is not restricted to this administration. But when you look at the current report and what it says, the law provides criminal penalties for corruption by government officials, but the government did not implement the law effectively, and officials frequently engaged in corrupt practices with impunity. There were numerous reports of government corruption. Corruption was present in all branches of government, according to media and NGOs, including recruitment into the security services. And since the first special prosecutor took office in 2018, no corruption case undertaken by that office resulted in a conviction. When the new special prosecutor took office in August, his staff included one investigator and one prosecutor, both seconded from other offices. It paints a dire picture, doesn't it, of our purported fight against corruption. Practically everyone who has been cited, apart from a few, sometimes even you would have another institution not originally tasked to look into the matter intervene and then clear the person within the last 5 years and beyond. Your quick reflection on this thorny matter, Dr. Kwapo.
The fight against corruption is one of those, just like you rightly said, you just ask yourself what more needs to be done, right? Because we do have quite a number of anti-corruption laws on the books, and penalties for engaging in various types of acts and behaviors that are deemed to be corrupt under the law. And so sometimes you ask yourself, is it a question of enforcement? And if it's a question of enforcement, who should do that enforcement? And are those who are charged with doing the enforcement have the necessary tools and resources in place to be able to do that enforcement? If it's a lack of resources, what more resources is needed to be able to do that? Because cycle after cycle, year after year, one election after the other, the issue of corruption continues to take center stage in our public discourses.
Yet, not to interject, but there are certain reports, I think the Global Analytics reports that recently came through, points to that as well. And interestingly, while it is not the foremost issue, it's I think the penultimate issue when it comes to what people are going to vote on in election 2024. So if you look at the top 10, then it tells you that it is a crucial matter of interest to ordinary Ghanaians.
Yes, it is, and and so increasingly it becomes that issue where we must find exactly why it continues to be a difficult fight. And as I said, if it's a lack of resources, what more resources are needed to be able to ensure that we fight the issue of corruption?
Dr. Kwapo, again, let me come in. You say we ought to find out why, but from where you sit, why do you think it is? Because if we have the Office of the Special Prosecutor, we have all these agencies that supposedly are meant to tackle corruption, and we still are where we are. And sometimes you would have a lot of officials, whether from government or others, cited for corruption, and it ends in nothing. On the perception curve, I mean, what does that mean? And on the realistic curve, again, what does that mean? So when you say we ought to find out, from where you sit, what do you think it is?
Maybe the will to fight it and fight it aggressively is not there. right? Because, like as you said, if we have all of these agencies, unless these agencies are under-resourced, and therefore, whilst we have structures in place, that the lack of, financial, human resources does not enable the fight very well, that's one question. But if all of these things are there, then what remains then is it a question of a true commitment and a will to really root it out on the part of all actors in the corruption chain? And maybe that's what it boils down to, right? That those who pledge to fight it must be very, very aggressive without fear or favor to try and root out this issue. But other than that, you keep wondering, and maybe it's so deeply entrenched that it's a fight that is going to take a long time to be able to finally get a hold of and approve. Those are some of my initial thoughts about the challenges of dealing with this very important public issue.
Professor Etua, dealing with this hydra-headed problem, they cite some specific matters, and it is worthy of mention here. One of them has to do with the fact that the Ghanaian consulate in Washington, D.C. could not account for visa fees totaling $355,000. They cite the Free SHS Secretariat, which has misspent more than $3.16 million. And we all know the billions of Ghana cedis that we pump into the Free SHS initiative. It concludes that corrupt practices resulted in $340 million of financial mismanagement, including misapplication and misappropriation of funds, theft, and procurement mismanagement. And just to add, Dr. Kwapong's entity, the CDD, also conducted a study, and the last one speaks about how, when it comes to people responding to their optimism in terms of government dealing with corruption, less than 30% of respondents were optimistic in terms of government's ability to fight corruption. What picture does this paint for you?
It paints a very negative picture, and it also reflects our human rights record, because corruption and human rights are strongly related. If corruption can be fought and won, it depends on the presence of certain kinds of civil and political rights. For example, the right to access to information, the right of access to the courts, the right to go on demonstrations, the right to demand accountability, and so on. And if that doesn't happen, and corruption thrives, it affects other human rights, as we talk about right to education, right to health issues, and so on. But there is a chain in the corruption structure where, depending on how you want to tackle it, you have to make sure that you tackle it from the top. Mm-hmm. And I think that is where the problem is. It goes way back to how political parties are funded and how people fund political parties. And at the end of the day, they want to, it's like investing in a business. You want to get your money out of it and the profits. So governments come to power, they make a lot of noise about dealing with corruption. The same way when we go back into the 70s, when there were a lot of coup d'etat in Ghana and other places, any new regime that comes to power says, I came to fight corruption. But in the end, at the end of the day, when they come in, they get embroiled in this same saga. And they end up also looting the coffers of the country. Now, in this time and age, corruption is being fought more on the plane of enacting laws and setting up institutions. We have the Procurement Act, we have the Whistleblowers Act. We can talk about a long list. We talk about the Assets, Declaration of Assets Act, and so on. But at the end of the day, it's just on paper. You don't have to look at what the law is or what the law says, but the effect of the law. And the effect of the law, that there's nothing good to talk about that. So it means that we are engaging in what I call legal predation, using the law.
We're engaging in what? Legal predation?
Yes. We're using the law to steal or to loot the country's resources. So When you look at the fact that we didn't have Office of Special Prosecutor, but for how many years that the system has been set up, even it was mentioned in the report, we are not seeing any impact on the ground. And the only excuse given is that fighting corruption takes time. You need to have the evidence and so on and so forth. But there is a preventive aspect of corruption as well as the creative aspect. A lot of the work can be done if we prevent corruption. Look at the work of SHRAJ. SHRAJ is, I may put it bluntly, in shambles because at the beginning of this work, SHRAJ was very active in doing anti-corruption work. But now you don't even hear about, even if you hear about SHRAJ, or not about its anti-corruption mandates. Why? Because that wing has been clipped or crippled and it's not able to perform its work. One way where SHRAJ could have been very effective in dealing corruption problem is through that angle. And one way in which SHRAJ has also been flipped from being effective in doing its management is the fact that it cannot rely on information it sees or reads in a newspapers and so on, which used to be the case at first. Now somebody officially has to report when investigations are undertaken. And that has taken that activist power that SHRAJ had to be able to investigate corruption and get into.
Is that something you feel we should revert to? Because like you're mentioning, it then clips the wings of SHRAJ. Is that something you feel we should look at again?
Definitely. And apart from that, we should also make sure that all the SHRAJ is supposed to have district offices throughout the country. Now, if you do a check, you realize that most of them are defunct or are malfunctioning, and they are more or less down to a halt. But if these SHRAJ offices are functioning and people have been educated and awareness raised that they should report, then we can see something working on the ground.
Okay.
But at the same time, you have a situation where those who have people are entering into some kind of deals with government, and government also decides to accept it because it will help them in winning power. And to me, indirectly, you cannot talk about the neutrality issue between flocks and government as corruption. But corruption can appear in an indirect form and works its way into the system. And the neutrality allowance thing is one point we need to talk about. We also want to reflect on the fact that when corruption begins, it sits down and there are different levels of corruption. But the key point about corruption is that it leads to infiltration of government. And it compromises the ability of government to function effectively because those who are able to influence the government through corruption are able to influence decision making. And so at the end of the day, it is the will of those that have the political clout or the economic clout that are able to control affairs of the country. And at least state capture, an example is what we have in South Africa. So to me, corruption is at the bottom of everything. And it has strong relations to human rights and to democracy.
Dr. Kwapong, quickly on that point that Prof makes, do you feel then that there is a subtle mechanism in place in order for institutions like SHRAJ maybe not to achieve their full mandate or do what they are capable of doing, which could put some public officials in a bad light by preventing them or not giving them the right funding so that they can grow? A typical example is the OSP, the Office of the Special Prosecutor. Martin Amidu complained time without number. Eventually, he stepped aside, and we all saw what happened after that, and the accusations and counter-accusations. Here we are, a new special prosecutor. So far, from where I sit, practically nothing has been seen. And we also know the same logistical challenges he is facing. Is that something you see to be a crucial problem we ought to change the script on?
Precisely. And as Prof said, for example, if you have on paper designed that we should have SHRAJ officers throughout the country to be able to help some of these anti-corruption efforts. And yet, let's say throughout the country, you may have only one or two well-functioning. Then it doesn't help with the process, right? As you mentioned, if you create an office of special prosecutor that is not well resourced and continues to face all of these logistic challenges, then whilst on paper and in the design of the efforts to fight corruption, it looks good on paper. In reality, you may not be able to make any headway because the critical tools that are needed beyond just the organizational structure and setup are missing. And therefore, you're right, there then that subtle implication that we really want to fight it, but we really don't want to fight it. So we make symbolic gestures without arming those symbolic gestures with the ability to actually deal with what we say we are committed to dealing with.
Right, right. And again, it appears that both of you are in unison on that particular point. But there's also the point made about the judiciary, and I'll come back to you, Professor Itua, on that, because definitely I know it's going to be an area of interest for you when it talks about Ghanaian judges taking bribes to lose records of cases. How damning is that for you, especially in our context where there have been accusations leveled at the judiciary that it seems to be leaning almost always in a certain direction, one direction, the direction of the ruling administration. But we've also been told that no, we hear from legal experts, some of them say it is about the merits of your case. And if your case is frivolous, it must be thrown out. And if it has merit, then you will get, a ruling in your favor. But per the report and what it says about the judiciary and infiltration and corruption, how true is that from where you sit?
Is it addressed to me?
Yes, Professor Itua, that one is for you.
Okay. Yes, it's certainly damning because when everything goes wrong, it is the court that serves as a source of refuge to ensure that justice prevails. And so if that particular department or arm of government is also corrupted, then it means you don't have anywhere to go. And hello?
Yes, Prof, you're live. I can hear you.
And in that sense, thank you. In that sense, it doesn't help at all in the delivery of justice. Now, but of course, we are not saying that all judges are corrupt. And with a particular reference to losing of power, I'm not sure it's actually judges that do that. It is the court officials, the clerks in the bailiffs, and I think it falls more under the ambit of the registrar's office to ensure that these things don't occur.
Right.
And I think one way of dealing with this is the introduction of the e-justice system, which is supposed to digitize filing of cases and keeping of documents online, which has also been supplemented by the case tracking system. Of course, the case tracking system only deals with criminal cases, but I must say the case tracking system is not functioning as it should.
Okay.
But it is also very important to help deal with corruption, because like I already said, that alert that alone that it gives can give you an indication of who is responsible for creating a bottleneck in the smooth running of the case from one department to the other. And then the files can also be sent electronically from maybe the police service to the AG's office, all done electronically and within seconds, instead of the dockets moving physically, which can take months.
Okay.
This thing can be in seconds to the office of the Attorney General to start reviewing the case before the physical docket would arrive. All these measures are supposed to deal with corruption in the system. One sure way to deal with corruption, especially within the judiciary, is through the digitization or putting the whole system into an electronic system, so that even where the judge is sitting over the case, he doesn't write manual in the hand.
Okay.
The information is recorded. Immediately after that, the lawyer can have access to a copy of the transcript, and then the case can move on smoothly. Cases, case management and determination of which judge will do which case, they can all be done electronically, and it's being done in the courts, but not as effective as it is. And some workers, unfortunately, also try to sabotage the system.
Okay.
Because not functioning properly, it disables them from engaging in corrupt underhand practice. So it is not just that the system is not, the digital system is not working, but also there is some sabotage in some process. And so it's important that that image of the judiciary is corrected, so that it will give confidence in the people to go to court.
We shall slightly be, shortly be looking at this. I just want to alert you as well, because this report by the U.S. State Department also talks about our politics and how it is executed right from the grassroots to the highest level. So as we continue talking about the judiciary, I shall interject at a point as we bring in the constituency level electoral process as far as the MPP is concerned. My colleague Parker Wilson is on the ground. He will join us shortly, gentlemen, and I would at that point intervene for him to bring us some details from the Okai-Kwe South constituency, where some members, some executives are threatening the process. So just note that as and when we have him, I'll have to intervene so that we can also look at it from that practical angle of what is happening currently. But before we do that, Dr. Kwapong, in respect of what the judiciary has been cited as doing in this context, questioning the neutrality of the country's judiciary, what do you make of it? And how can we, better ameliorate the situation?
So if you think of the judiciary as being fair and impartial arbiters in the system, right? If I have a dispute with you, what would give me the incentive to seek redress in court? Some of the things that would give me the incentive to seek redress in court is to know that justice will be dispensed without fear or favor, right? That I will be treated fairly, you will be treated fairly, right? You need those signals that gives you the confidence that if I go to court, my case will be heard and heard very well, that even if I lose, I would walk away knowing very well that I was giving a fair and impartial hearing.
And that I lost because I deserved to lose, that the system worked. Not because there was influence. Because when you read the report, it talks about the fact that judicial officials reportedly accept bribes to expedite or postpone cases, to lose records or issue favorable rulings for the payer of the bribe. Of course, that wouldn't foster confidence.
Right. And I find those to be very, very worrying. That these are things that the judicial service must take very seriously, look into it, weed it out. If they are, Prof was talking about some of the measures that can be used to stem some of these things, the filing of cases electronically, all of those things. Because the last thing you want is a judiciary that is perceived to be corrupt, because it weakens confidence in the courts. It weakens people's trust in that institution, that they may have no incentive to approach that institution to say, I have a dispute with person X, or I have been injured in one way or the other, and therefore I am coming to you to seek redress. The last thing you want is for your citizens to have the perception that justice goes to the highest bidder. And for me, that was one of the most worrying things that I saw in the report. And again, quickly, if you go back to the Afrobarometer report, we tend to have overall low trust in institutions, but you do see very low levels of trust in the courts. And I've regularly said that whatever it is that we're doing or not doing, that doesn't garner confidence of citizens in our key institutions like the courts, it has to be a point of concern for court officials, for the entire judicial system. And the question must be asked, what are some of the things that we really need to do and pay attention to? Because like I keep saying, the last thing you want is your citizens losing faith and confidence in an establishment that is designed to be fair and impartial arbiters in the system. So for me, that was one of the most worrying portions of the report, because of how critically important your judiciary is, especially when it comes to the delivery of justice.
Quick question to you, Dr. Kwapong, and to Prof as well. You look at the 2015, expose by Anas Arimeyaw Anas, and how some 12, judges were pointed at negatively. Some of them eventually relieved of their positions through proper processes, of course, because we know they are appointed for life, or so to speak, till certain mechanisms kick in. And looking at now, would you say we're any better when it comes to the judicial front or the administration of justice between then and now? Have you seen any positive highlights? I'll start with you, Dr. Kwapong, quickly and go back to Prof.
Good question. I don't know, because it just looks like we keep hearing or issues keep emerging. And so because these issues keep emerging, makes you think that the work is not done, there's still work to be done, that the challenges may be a little, maybe more deeper than maybe we even anticipated or imagined with just the removal of a number of judges, because it looks like it's not just an issue of just just the judges, that perhaps it's all of the key players involved in the justice delivery ecosystem that needs to be looked at.
For you, Prof, how do you react between 2015 and the Anas expose and now? Any advancement in terms of our justicial system?
It's also difficult to tell, but what we can say is that certainly the problem has not gone away. Probably it has taken new ways and new shapes, which as a means of avoiding detection. But when we talk about corruption within the judiciary, we should not just focus on the judges. It's a well-connected system, which includes lawyers, includes court officials, and it also includes the users of the court system. So we need to put it into that perspective so that we can understand where the problem is. And if you want to proffer solutions, we also know that we cannot just look at one side and feel that we can solve the problem.
Right.